gentlemen, chers téléspectateurs de la Proxy TV, bienvenue. Tout à l'heure, comme Maïgon et Momo, hein? Donc, le forum B, ça continue à 9e édition internationale de l'eau. Donc, on est actuellement avec, je suis en compagnie avec Raïssa, bien sûr.
Hi, salut, vous allez bien?
Donc, Raïssa qui va traduire en anglais parce qu'il y a des anglophones ici. Donc, quand on dit Forum international de l'eau, Raïssa, donc toutes les nationalités sont réunies.
Yes.
Exactement. Donc, du coup, vu que nous, moi je gère le français, tu vois, non? Momo, il va gérer le Wolof. Donc, toi aussi, tu vas gérer l'anglais.
Et pourquoi il n'est pas là, le Momo?
Momo, il va venir. Il est en train de faire des interviews là derrière.
Ok, d'accord.
Donc, on dit 9e édition du Forum international de l'eau.
It's the 9th edition of the Water Forum,
Voilà,
first time in Senegal.
Qui se passe ici à Diamniadio.
Present in Diamniadio, Senegal.
Donc, on est là, dans l'espace jeunesse. Hein?
We are in Jeunesse Space.
Espace jeunesse qui a été décoré et conçu par des jeunes étudiants.
Which was decorated by young students.
Donc voilà, Raïssa, c'est ça en gros, quoi. Donc quand on dit Forum international de l'eau, c'est pour trouver des solutions, pour essayer d'aider les femmes qui sont dans les villages, qui n'arrivent pas à avoir de l'eau, qui traversent de village en village pour juste avoir de l'eau. Et ça, en fait, on veut trouver des solutions pour que ces jeunes femmes aujourd'hui aient une facilité en fait d'avoir l'eau. Une facilité pour avoir accès à l'eau en fait, parce que c'est très difficile en fait.
Okay. So basically the forum is about the problems, the rural problems of water in this country, and it's to help most women who actually struggle to get water, who has to walk hours to get water in their villages or rural areas in Senegal. So this forum is about that. It's about finding solutions as well. Yeah, basically this is why we're here for.
Donc ça fait une semaine, ça va se passer pendant une semaine, ça fait depuis lundi qu'on est là. Hein,
yeah, started on Monday to Saturday.
Exactly.
Yeah, voilà.
But on est là depuis le 21 et ça va se terminer le 26.
Okay. So it's from the 21st to the 26th.
Exactly. But là actuellement, on est dans l'espace jeunesse. Là derrière, donc il y a des conférences comme vous le voyez. Les caméramans bien sûr et la régie vont vous montrer tout à l'heure qu'est-ce qui va se passer à l'intérieur. On a des conférences, des échanges et puis des classes, des formations. Bref, il y a plein de choses derrière. Oh, oui, ça fait partie, hein. C'est la déco. Il y a le vent, ça bouge, ça move.
Regarde mes cheveux là. My hair, my God.
Donc, Forum international de l'eau, Raïssa. Donc, tu peux boire de l'eau, hein.
Yes, let's drink some water.
Mets-toi à l'aise.
Let's drink some water.
Yeah, mets-toi à l'aise parce que...
On va boire combien d'eau par jour là?
Dans les normes, on doit boire 1 litre d'eau. Minimum 1 litre d'eau par jour.
Tu as bien fait t'as bien fait tes recherches toi?
Minimum. Après, t'es médecine. Hein. C'est vrai qu'elle a fait médecine exactement. Donc le minimum c'est combien?
1,5.
1,5 le minimum.
2 litres.
2 litres.
C'est parfait. C'est le conseil en tout
Mon
cas.
Dieu,
2 litres d'eau par jour. Ouais.
Buvez 2 litres d'eau par jour.
2 litres d'eau par jour les gars.
Vous êtes obligés.
Pour une bonne santé en tout cas. On y va, cheers.
Cheers.
Mais ouvre ta bouteille quand même. Voilà. Donc, à vous, santé à vous.
On va trinquer à l'eau.
À l'eau en tout cas. Encore.
On trinque
à l'eau.
On va trinquer à l'eau. Et voilà, parce qu'on est au Forum international de l'eau, première édition, 9e édition, ici au Sénégal, pour une première, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, and even the decoration wants a drink.
Donc là, actuellement, je pense que les gars ont commencé à la régie, derrière. On vous rappelle que vous êtes en live en direct sur Proxy TV, les gars. Vous pouvez avoir le live via les réseaux sociaux aussi, sur YouTube, sur Instagram, sur Facebook. Donc,
generation and learn from one another. So how is this session going to be? Over here you see some young people and some professionals from the work field, and they are combined in pairs of two. So I'm going to first ask a question to the person to the left of me, and they will also ask the question to their companion. So the first question that I have is for Ahmed Elberi from Palestine. He is a facilitator for Blue Peace and also a member of the World Youth Parliament for Water. And he's working together today with Dr. Mara Dimino. She is lead general specialist and part of Geneva Water Hub. So my first question will be for Mara. How is water protected in situations of occupation? What are the weaknesses of this protection? And how could the protection of the water resources end up in the International Criminal Court or other international jurisdictions?
So thank you for the question. I will try to give you some elements of the legal regime that applies to occupied territories. So we have a text, the Hague regulations of 1907 that contains some provisions in the situation of occupation, and I think one important element is to underline when a territory is defined as occupied, and the definition given by the Hague regulation, it is that it is a de facto authority, and something that it is very important to keep in mind that it is that this de facto authority that exercises a control over a territory does not mean that the sovereign states lose its sovereign rights over the territory. So it is a de facto situation where a state or in some cases also a non-state actor exercise a control over the territory, but this does not mean the legitimate sovereign is losing its right of sovereignty over the territory. So this is the first aspect of the legal regime of occupation. Another aspect it is so what are the powers of the occupying authority over the territory. So the first rule it is that the authority exercising the control over this territory can adopt new laws, but this is really strictly limited under international humanitarian law. So the change in the laws can be only motivated by the needs of the population, so that the laws that are adopted cannot for example, support the occupying power to continue its occupation, because we need not to remind that the occupation regime is a temporary status, but we know, unfortunately, know that we have long occupation over more than 40 years. So what we can do in this case? So I think that in this case, international humanitarian law has some gaps, is not adapted really to this situation, because, as I said, the original idea of the international humanitarian law was that the occupation is a temporary situation. So maybe not to answer to your question, not to fill the gaps of international humanitarian law. No, we can make a resort to human rights law. And in particular, there is this evolution of the recognition of the human right to water. So we can say that the occupying power has no responsibilities, obligation not to provide, to ensure that water is supplied to the civilian population, and in any case the occupying power is not allowed to interfere in the provision of water to the civilian population. And of course also there is a clear prohibition of also destroying the destruction of water infrastructure, including in occupied territories. So regarding the second part of your question, so what are the legal mechanisms? There are a few. So we can think, for example, to the UN human rights mechanism. So there are some UN human rights global treaties that establish committees where the complaint can be brought. For an example, it is the committees on the rights of the child. There are also regional human rights mechanism, like the European Court of Human Rights. Actually, for example, there was an interstate dispute between in Cyprus for the occupied territory in Cyprus. And then we have a universal jurisdiction like the International Court of Justice. So this is also a way to bring claims by the states. And there is also the possibility to have the resort to the International Criminal Court, but at the basis of the International Court of international courts, international jurisdiction, states. So to bring a claim before an international jurisdiction, the first element, it is a basis of consent to bring the dispute. So this is the possible mechanism that can be used, and so this is what I wanted to say this first round. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I also have a question to Ahmed. What are the gaps in the water infrastructure protection regime, and what is important to protect in terms of conflict? How can civil society and youth help?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here, and also for all the panelists here. So for the first question, we have like 30% of the population don't have the access for water, and most of them even for the hygiene level and are not connected for the system of water. So this could affect the groundwater and could be contaminated, or this which consider one of the main resources that we have for water in Palestine, and this could lead to a disaster in that level, even with the all possibles that we are trying to achieve for water treatment and also for accessing for water. In the second part of the question, you have mentioned that accessing for water could be one of the rights that should provide for all the people, regardless what they are belong to or something like that. And even attack these one should be considered like the war crime, and that should be also delivered to the international court for consider as to be war crime. Youth have been engaged in many level in the water sector and even in these maybe let's say hot area in the world, and they have much commitment to at least have life that could be good for them. So as we remember that in May 2021 there was like an aggression on Gaza, which also targeting even like the Associated Press, which considered to be a press that is aligned, that have no any related for any other party that in Gaza or any place, and the building that was also know that is belong to civil society and for the people and contain a lot of NGOs. It has been targeted, and this should be also delivered for the international court. And after that, youth got launched one of the greatest initiative in Gaza that have 1,000 youth has worked for 14 days that's tried to reconstruct what have been destroyed. So it was launched on the Facebook and Instagram with a name like Hanammerha, which meaning in English, we will reconstruct it once again for all that the destruction that happened in Palestine. So we as the youth have the potential to do a lot, but sometimes the limitation could be one of the frustrated that we face on plus the occupation could be one of the worst things have the Palestinian in that. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. So the second dialogue will happen between Egan Abdin Mohammed. She's the General Director for the Youth Parliament in Sudan for water. And with Bram Rimes. He's Senior Technical Advisor for WASH Direction Expertise et Plaidoyer à ACF France. So my question to Egan, how can we ensure water management is How can we ensure water management is efficient in time of peace and remains efficient throughout a conflict or post-conflict phase?
Thank you, Stas, for this wonderful speaking. And I think the fact that conflicts in many areas are predictable to some stage leads to the importance of having in-depth social studies to the area in context of culture, of religion, of population, and then in the design stage itself, before implementing the infrastructure, we need to consider the location of the water infrastructure itself to be suitable for all the stakeholder, and to consider the factor of maintenance to this infrastructure, to using tools and materials that can be maintained if anything happened. Also engaging all stakeholders of implementing this infrastructure can get to them this sense of ownership. So even when there is a conflict, they won't harm this structure because they work in it and they implement it. And also having educational programs on this infrastructure, how it works, its importance to them, really, because the fact that in the conflict itself, many technical experts immigrant from the place of the conflict. So there is a need to people themselves have the knowledge on this infrastructure. So I think it's more about people themselves and more about considering the maintenance in it. And here comes a role of civil societies and role of youth initiatives to ensure having this sense of ownership and this knowledge of this infrastructure. And since Prime is here, I want to ask him how ASF respond to ensure water access and management in time of conflict settings, and what are the main challenges and concerns that you faced while working it.
Thank you, Egan. So, Action Against Hunger, we're an international humanitarian NGO, and we work in close to 50 countries in the world, including those affected by the worst conflicts: Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, DRC, Ukraine. These are the areas we work in. So what do we do to try and ensure access to basic services? Let's split it up. There's a first phase of an emergency in a conflict where we aim to intervene within 72 hours. If we can't intervene ourselves, we will try to intervene with local partners. This is an immediate response. And the idea is to provide life-saving support, including access to water. Okay. How do we do that? In conflict settings, we need to negotiate access. In many areas, we can't access. And we need to negotiate with both parties, because we have a mandate as a humanitarian NGO, and we need to be neutral and impartial. Okay. This is not easy, but luckily there is a coordination system at the level of the UN, which is called the cluster, and at the level of the country, and even at the sub-levels, regional levels, you often have, in a type of a crisis or conflict setting, you have a cluster mechanism which can discuss issues around access, which can do lobbying and advocacy to make sure that we can reach those areas. There's a big issue. I'm gonna mix how we try to do things with challenges. Lack of information. Often, especially if we can't access, we don't know what's happening on the ground. We're trying to solve some of these issues. One of the most recent methodologies to try and solve it, and this is also being used right now in Ukraine, for instance, is to ask information to people who have left the area of conflict. Okay, they have left 2 days, 3 days, 4 days ago, and we try to get as much information as we can from them, and this we use as a proxy to know what's happening. Then of course we intervene. The first types of responses are things like water trucking. It's a typical one, making sure water is safe for consumption and driving it to the area where there's no water, bringing in water treatment units to treat water with chlorination, taking water from rivers, taking water from lakes, etc., and treating it for immediate access, treating water at the level of the household with chemicals. I'm gonna add an issue to that, and it's what we see is in some countries, Middle East, we have been water trucking for years. Normally the duration, maximum duration for water trucking is 3 months. Why? Because it's super costly. You need to pump up the water, fill in the tanks, drive it for kilometers, and provide it to bladders to the affected population. In some countries, Jordan, where you have Syria, large refugee populations that have been there right now for years, we cannot find alternative solutions, and this is a political issue. The political issue is that if you drill boreholes, then the situation of the refugees in the eyes and the perspective of the government, they risk becoming permanent. And this is a situation that many governments want to avoid. And this is a huge challenge, and it's incredibly costly, but it's the way it is. First phase, we try to give life-saving water support. Then what happens? There's the next phase. Today, a typical crisis in the world, it lasts for 9 to 10 years. Okay? So we go from 72 hours to 9 to 10 years, and all sorts of things happen and all sorts of challenges emerge. What we want to do is increase the service levels. We want to make sure that what we provide is of better quality and covers more people. So we go from 2 liters, 3 liters per person per day as a very minimum. In the first weeks we try to go up to acceptable levels of up to 10 to 15 liters per person per day. And this depends very much on context as well. In Middle East there's countries where the acceptable level of quantity of water goes up to 50 liters per person per day. So this is quite huge quantities. We try to rehabilitate, we try to construct, and we do all the stuff that WASH humanitarian organizations do. Challenges. More. In a conflict setting, we lose human resources. Not necessarily in the very first phase of an emergency, but the longer the crisis goes on, the more capacity goes out and leaves, because everybody wants to try a better future for itself, and that applies also for the WASH engineers that are employed by the water utilities and by the governments. That makes it harder for everyone to find the good engineers to keep these services running. When there's a conflict, there's always displacement. Displacement means a lot of people going from one place to another and accessing the water points that are in that place. These water points are not fit for that amount of people. So we have an incredible increase of demand and systems that are not fit for that. And this is a huge challenge as well. And there's a huge challenge, and there's an additional risk, for example, of over-abstraction. If you use your groundwater, you risk permanently decreasing your groundwater levels, and these are huge issues today. Something else, when we construct and rehabilitate, we also need to avoid new conflicts and prevent new conflicts from arising. In many settings here in the Sahel, sufficiently is analyze the political and social context, and this is what you were talking about as well. We are risking creating new conflicts between pastoralists and farmers who access the same water point. So we risk increasing new conflicts, and this is something that's of increasing importance as well. And then, I mean, a last challenge, let's take Ukraine. Amara, you were talking about the occupying power has the obligation to at least not to interfere, and actually to supply water to the population and the territory that they occupy. Now in Ukraine, for instance, it's an interesting case, because in the eastern Ukraine you have the non-government controlled areas, actually, so the Russian territory. You have the Crimea, which is also Russia. But as for the entire Donbas, the east of Ukraine, the water resources have been shared by both Ukrainian authorities and the population that lives there, and Russian occupying forces. Why? Because of the type of the system. So what happens there is they take huge amounts of water from the rivers, pipe it in pipes up to 1 diameter, and these treat it, of course, and these pipes, they supply water to an entire city. So Mariupol, the one we're reading about, 400,000 people, is fed by such a system. Of course it makes it incredibly vulnerable, because you just have to bomb the pipe or the water treatment system, and an entire city is without water. And this is what happened. Now in the east, part of the conflict is about sharing those resources, because the Ukrainian controlled areas, they are the ones that are supplying the water to areas that are controlled by Russia. And there was, the last couple of years, there's been an understanding between those two about sharing that, and a preoccupation about that to some extent. And the Crimea, it's the contrary. It's the same. It's the water comes from Ukrainian controlled, and what they have done is, after the annexation of the Crimea by Russia, they've cut off the water supply. So we see, in any case, to sum up, we see more and more cases of conflict and tension every year around water points that are attacked purposively, and increasingly challenges for implementers like us to not only access them, but also to try and repair them, then to try and manage them over time to make sure they remain functional, and eventually to try and, as much as we can, hand them over to either authorities, which may have been part of a conflict, or local committees. I'm gonna end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can imagine that there will be many questions or comments after these two dialogues. Keep them in mind. We're going to the third dialogue, and after that there's time for questions. So the third dialogue will be about linking science and practices in the protection of water during armed conflicts. And with us today we have Sina Vakesh Girma Wolde. She's an early stage researcher, and she also works for New Wave Next Water Governance at Politecnico di Milano. And we also have Dr. Caroline Pelleton, Corporate Operations Manager at Geneva Water Hub. So my first question is for you, Caroline. In your view, what is the role of organizations like the Geneva Water Hub working at the intersection between science and practices? And what is the added value of linking both dimensions?
Thank you very much for the question. So, as mentioned in the question, we are center of the University of Geneva at the interface between science and policy. And we ensure that water is used as a vector for peace. And through research, education and facilitation, we promote good water governance from the local to the international level, from the grassroots to the policy makers. And how we do that? We develop this methodology that we call the safe space, where we bring a diversity of actors together. And it's the safe space is a discrete environment where names stay very confidential. The names are not shared outside of this working session under what we call the Chatham House rules. And through this format, we can have like a very open dialogue with people who are sometimes not on the same wavelength, but who are in this format willing to exchange and find solutions. And very often we have some very good recommendations coming from this safe space. And the work that has been done on the Geneva list of principles on the protection of water infrastructure is a good illustration of this type of work. So the team of Maratinino provided at the research level this compilation of the existing rules regarding the protection of water infrastructure during and after conflicts. This document was then shared with a various range of actors from the humanitarian sector, legal experts, international legal experts, militaries, and discussed. And once the document was validated, we published it. And there we started the work of presenting this list in many forums, like today, but also through fora where there are politicians involved or diplomats. Like in Geneva, we have the group of Friends on Water and Peace, which convene missions to the UN in Geneva, and the list was very often discussed. And through this group of friends, we have also several countries who started to be really interested in the work that's been done by Mara. And then they started to endorse this work, and like Togo, I see someone from Togo here, Slovenia, Switzerland are really now pushing for these plans. And that's also the recent safe space that we had, where we had really experts from the humanitarian sector, civil society, legal experts, protection of the environment, international organizations, and where everybody could really explain their constraints and then their work and find a common ground of what would be possible in the future, recommendations to work on to ensure better protection of water infrastructure. So I hope I gave you a clear picture of a bit how it is possible. It's a lot of effort, really breaking silos, bringing people together, promoting, continuing the dialogue, and ensuring that slowly it becomes bigger. Thank you. Yeah. So now it's to you, Sinafikesh. So in all that you've listened so far, how is use affected when water infrastructure is destroyed, and also how can the civil society in use really help in this dialogue?
Thank you, Dr. Caroline. So I will tell you a little bit about a civil war, which is still going on, recently happened in Ethiopia. So normally infrastructures are attacked and destroyed when there is external enemy. But then when there's a civil war, both parties are from the same country. So for the case of North Ethiopia, there is a Tekeze Dam, which is a very large dam and reservoir. And what happened is both the Ethiopian government and the rebel groups actually took it as a more protection. So they were both keeping it so that the other one will not attack each other. So one time the government will take the control of the dam, and then the next time the rebel groups will take it. So in the case of civil war, I would say there is a sense of belonging, like the water infrastructures belongs to them. So in that case, they tend to protect it instead of destroying it. But then in the other case, when two countries are fighting, they could be completely destroyed, which will lead to, which will affect youth and the society in general. So how the youth and the society could change this is by spreading awareness. Especially the youth could spread awareness and spread the information to other, especially smaller communities who don't have information on how to protect this kind of infrastructures. And also, I would say we need a big diplomacy training. Diplomacy training in negotiation and making sure these infrastructures are protected, whether from the external enemy or internal conflict. And Geneva Water Hub and also other international organizations, I hope, would facilitate this kind of diplomacy training for all countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now I can imagine that there are many questions. So from the crowd, is there anyone who wants the panel to ask a question? Yeah?
Yeah, thanks for all the lovely presentations. My name is Boluwati Toawe. I'm from Nigeria, and I'm with the World Youth Parliament for Water. So my please, apologies, I forgot. I've been listening, catching a lot of names this week, and all the names are just lost in my head. So my question is to you from Action Against Hunger. I want to find out if the case of trucking water for several years, is it as a result of the area not having not having water in itself, maybe I don't know, groundwater, or is it a case of not wanting to build permanent infrastructures in these communities? Because if you look at it, sorry, you know, if you're talking about the cost of, you know, trucking water, won't you say building a more permanent structure to provide water would be more economical than trucking water for several years?
Thanks so much for that question. It's absolutely the second one. Nobody likes to do and wants to do water trucking for years, and it's really because of political motivations to say, because if when you create a water point, and especially if you drill, and especially even more if you drill deep, your water infrastructure gets a permanent character. And this is what many authorities, either at state level in Nigeria or at national level, don't want to have, because it creates, it implies a recognition, or it could create, in their view, a permanent status of either displaced persons or either refugees. With this caveat, take Nigeria, it's a good case in point, northeast. We have been drilling a lot of boreholes in Borno. The north of Borno is the Lake Chad area. And there the groundwater is up to 800 meters depth. Like Damboa and all those areas, it's easily 500 meters, okay? And we see, because of the whole Lake Chad region, the Lake Chad is declining, okay? The water level has been declining for many years, and it's affecting the entire region, and it's affecting that area there. And there's even worse, there's also salinity, much higher levels of salinity because of that. This is creating a situation where we no longer, and it's in an area of conflict, we no longer have the capacity to provide water because it's too deep and too hard and too costly. No longer have the capacity to provide water to those populations. So we're getting at a point where the question is going to pose itself. We as a humanitarian also, if we keep on doing this, are we also not sustaining something that is eventually unsustainable? And this is a hard question to ask, and I have no answer to that.
Thank you. Do you want to reply to that, or if there are any other questions, that's also possible? Yeah? Okay.
When we now talk, maybe a follow-up.
If you stand here.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe as a follow-up, and when I'm not an expert, but maybe when we now look at international humanitarian laws around water and provision of water, is there a dialogue currently around this situation that we're seeing would be upon us in the near future with other humanitarian sectors? And apart from the northeast, for instance, I want to talk about what has happened in Benue State as well. We see that there is no, I was with an organization that was implementing sanitation in this area, and when all of a sudden the conflict came up with the farmers and pastoralists, and there was a displacement, we were not prepared for it. But when we now started coordinating, we saw that different humanitarian organizations came and were just doing their things independently. And this one was, the Red Cross was doing its thing, this one was doing its thing, the other one was doing its thing, and there was no coordination between the humanitarian organizations. So is there a means to facilitate dialogue to try to see how these things can be resolved, or is everybody still working independently and in silos, and then we're going to have this problem in the near future, and then everyone has to face the problem?
Does someone want to reply to that? Yes.
Can I reply to the second question? I don't feel qualified for the first, because it's more around the effects of including climate change, and what it would mean for. Would you be able to respond? Have some thoughts around it? I don't feel qualified. But for the second question, it's absolutely, yeah. It's something we're trying to overcome, and we've been talking about for many years, and we're still talking about it. So it's today we give it a new name. We call it Nexus. And then people say, "Oh, we don't know what it means," and yeah. Of course, I mean, we coordinate in the first phase of an emergency. There's precisely the cluster. What does the cluster do? It will build consensus about who intervenes where, when. Basically, that's the first phase. The hard part comes afterwards. Is when after a couple of months, 6 months, say a year, your aim changes. You want to build more accessible, reliable infrastructure. You want as much as possible. Of course, you try to do that from the start, but in many cases it's not possible. Include the local user committees, etc., etc. But the ideal is, and we have a good example in Nigeria, but it's not possible everywhere, is where we try to provide water, drilling boreholes to communities, etc. And at the same time, we're working with the state authorities in Borno and in Yobe to build a master plan, to set up roundtables with everybody, to make decisions on where we think the priorities are, and they need to be in the driver's seat of that. But it is also, and that's the last point, it is also the Borno state where the governor is suspending IDP camps because of the upcoming elections and creating additional issues with existing water infrastructure and new needs. I don't know. Who wants to have a thought on the first?
Thank you. I will share my experience from the case of Ethiopia. I used to work in a Jawi refugee camp which hosts South Sudan war refugees. And there, in terms of coordination, like he said, the government plays a big role here. So the Ethiopian government created this coordination. All the NGOs and international organizations or local NGOs working in the camp had to have a coordination meeting every week. And like he said, everyone was divided. Some would work on the water, some would work on sanitation and hygiene. And so the government was coordinating the action. In that case, there was a smooth work in the camp. And at times there used to be like surge of refugees that come in 2-3 days, and you have to construct houses, toilets and water points in a very few days. And but still it was going smoothly, I would say. And so for coordination, regions and governments play a big role. But in your case, conflicts are kind of short term, but then these refugees have been there since 2013. So now it feels like almost a permanent home. Yeah, thank you.
I see another question in the audience.
Yeah, better in French. So, yeah, I can think of it. Moi, je suis Pandiado du Togo. Ma question, c'était de voir par rapport à la présentation le niveau de la qualité de l'eau dans de pareilles situations, parce que tel qu'on le dit, c'est pas dans les situations de crise, on fonctionne en mode dégradé. Maintenant, est-ce que la qualité de l'eau, n'est-ce pas qu'on arrive quand même à suppléer aux gens? Est-ce que c'est quand même d'un niveau quand même acceptable? Merci.
The translator.
I can translate it.
Oh, you can?
What? Yes, I can translate the question. So, but I think the three of you speak French. So, but the question is about the quality of the water in terms of war and conflicts. It's how do we ensure that the quality is acceptable and a good level of quality? You want to go, Mara?
So yeah, I think that this is a good point. That we from the international law perspective, it is not really addressed. It is at least in international humanitarian law, human rights law. In the human right to water. We think we talk also about the quality of water. And then, of course, there is international environmental law that can bring many aspects on the standards of water. But I think that yes, that this is not a very important point, of course, in the case of occupation, but also in the case of armed conflict, in the conduct of hostilities. So to think about the, for example, damage targeting, for example, industrial facilities and the damage that this can have to water courses or groundwater resources. So the international humanitarian law only forbids the damage that are really important, that they achieve a certain threshold. So I think that this is we need to work on this topic more. Thank you.
You prefer the answer in French or en français? Okay, I'll do both then. Il y a aussi la notion du triple nexus WASH qui est en train d'être développé et on voit que dans de nombreux conflits, il y a, on est dans des pays où les infrastructures en eau souffrent déjà beaucoup. Et il y a déjà de grands besoins pour assurer une eau de qualité et en quantité nécessaire. Et il est de plus en plus important maintenant d'anticiper pendant les périodes de paix, d'investir pour déjà assurer que ces infrastructures en eau soient opérationnelles et qu'elles aient suffisamment de résilience en cas de conflit pour ne pas se retrouver dans des situations dramatiques comme on a pu se retrouver que ce soit en République centrafricaine ou dans d'autres pays. Il y aurait plein d'exemples à ma droite. So I was just saying that in addition to what Maha was saying, there's this triple WASH nexus that is being developed currently, and many international organizations and donors are involved in this concept. And when we look at a lot of the countries where there's conflict, it's countries that are really already, where the water infrastructure and the Ministry of Water are really struggling to ensure that water is provided in quantity necessary and also quality. So the work is really like during peacetime and in key moments of peacetime to really reinforce those water infrastructure and ensure that when a conflict arrives there is enough already resilience in place and not to like from an already struggling system like fall in a really major crisis. Do you want to add something?
Maybe just to say that water quality is not the standard for water quality. Le standard de la qualité d'eau, il n'est pas différent en situation de crise vis-à-vis une autre situation ou en conflit. The standard for water quality is the same in every context, whether conflict, crisis, natural disaster, outbreak, cholera, whatever. So in the field we use those standards. We measure water quality before construction, after handover, but then it stops. It stops because the government, more often than not, do not have the means to test water frequently. The ideal is it done every month. Every month, that water should be measured and checked, and etc., etc. And what would be even better is if the local user committees could test the water themselves. That would be the ideal situation, because then they can also find solutions to remediate. Unfortunately, testing water on bacteriological contamination is complex, not easy to do, costly, and you need the materials and the lab and the training. This technology is evolving to come up with a solution. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to end this session. Our time is up, unfortunately. I really want to thank the panel for this very interesting open discussion. Can we get an applause? Great. And I also want to thank my translator in the back for translating everything to French. And if there are any more questions or you want to continue the discussion, feel free to do so. The panel members are still here. So. Oh, there's one more. Yes, of course.
comme vous savez, la paix est souvent promue par la culture. Puis il y a une initiative qui est menée par le Geneva Water Hub, l'OMVS et le secrétariat international de l'eau qui s'appelle La Voix du fleuve et la Voix de la paix. Et ce soir, il y aura un immense spectacle avec des artistes très, très important ici au Sénégal, Baba Mal, la Garaji Family. Donc, ça va être un grand spectacle qui va se tenir juste à côté de l'espace d'exposition. Donc, on vous invite vraiment à vous joindre, à mobiliser tout le monde. Ça va être une grande fête pour la paix et pour l'eau. Donc, venez ce soir en grand nombre.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I should translate it. So, this evening there will be a very huge show, music show with really well recognized musicians from Senegal, and it will be about water and peace. It's a project that we've been leading for together with the Geneva Water Hub and the UMVS and some local partners for 2 years now. And it will be an amazing show. You don't want to miss this show. It's going to be the show of the week. Of course!